In the scorching heat of Afghanistan's Helmand province, Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez never imagined that carrying ammunition boxes would transform her into one of the deadliest snipers in military history. She was just supposed to haul gear, stay in the background, and let the men do the fighting. But when bullets started flying and her team's designated marksman lay bleeding in the dust, everything changed in a heartbeat. What happened next would challenge everything the military thought they knew about women in combat, rewrite the rules of engagement, and turn a quiet supply specialist into a legend whispered about in barracks from Kabul to Camp Pendleton. This is the story of how one fallen SEAL's final words transformed an ammunition carrier into a shooter who would save more lives than anyone thought possible. Some stories are born in boardrooms and planned in strategy meetings. Others emerge from chaos, written in dust and blood, where split-second decisions determine who lives and who dies. This is one of those stories, raw, unfiltered, and absolutely true. Maria Rodriguez had always been comfortable in the shadows. Growing up in East Los Angeles, she learned early that sometimes the best way to survive was to be invisible, to let others take the spotlight while you quietly did what needed to be done. That philosophy served her well when she enlisted in the Army at 19, choosing the military occupation specialty of ammunition specialist. It seemed perfect, important work that kept her away from the front lines, supporting the real fighters without having to become one herself. But Afghanistan had other plans. The forward operating base Chapman sat like a concrete island in an ocean of dust and hostility. Surrounded by mountains that seemed to watch every movement, the base housed a mix of Army, Navy, and Marine units, all working together in the complex dance of modern warfare. Maria had been deployed there for 3 months, and her routine was predictable. Wake up before dawn, check ammunition supplies, coordinate with unit leaders, and spend most of her day moving boxes of bullets, grenades, and other ordnance from storage to the teams heading out on patrol. She was good at her job. Maybe too good. The other soldiers respected her efficiency and her ability to keep track of every round, every piece of equipment. But respect and acceptance were two different things. In the male-dominated world of military operations, Maria often felt like she was performing a careful balancing act. Competent enough to be valued, but not so competent that she threatened anyone's ego. The morning of September 15th started like any other. Maria was in the ammunition depot, a reinforced concrete building that smelled of gun oil and metal, checking inventory lists on her clipboard. The supplies were running lower than usual, which meant a resupply convoy would be coming in from Bagram later that day. She made notes about what they needed most urgently, her pen scratching across the paper in the dim light filtering through small, heavily barred windows. Outside, she could hear the familiar sounds of base life generators humming, trucks rumbling past, the occasional shout from soldiers conducting morning PT. It was almost peaceful, if you could forget where you were and why you were there. Lieutenant Jake Morrison appeared in the doorway of the depot, his silhouette dark against the bright morning sun behind him. Maria had worked with Morrison before. He was a SEAL team leader, the kind of guy who seemed to have been born for combat, tall, lean, with intense gray eyes that missed nothing. He commanded respect without having to demand it. More importantly, he was one of the few officers who treated Maria like a professional rather than a curiosity. "Rodriguez," he said, stepping into the depot, "we've got a situation developing. Need you to prep ammunition for a team that's going out in 2 hours. Maria looked up from her clipboard. "What kind of loadout, sir?" "Full combat. We're expecting heavy contact." Morrison's expression was serious, more serious than usual. "Intel says there's a high-value target in a compound about 20 clicks northwest of here. Taliban commander who's been coordinating attacks on supply convoys. We're going in to get him." She nodded, already mentally cataloging what they would need. "How many shooters?" 12-man team. Mix of SEALs and Army Rangers. They'll need standard rifle ammunition, extra magazines, grenades, and," he paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully, "sniper support ammunition." Maria raised an eyebrow. Sniper missions were usually planned well in advance, with specialized ammunition prepared days ahead of time. Last-minute addition. "Yeah." "Our designated marksman came down with food poisoning this morning, bad enough that the medics grounded him. We're pulling in Petty Officer Collins from another team, but he's not familiar with our usual loads." Morrison watched her as she pulled out a different checklist, one specifically for precision shooting missions. "Think he can put together something that'll work?" "Absolutely, sir." Maria had been studying marksmanship and ballistics in her spare time, mostly out of curiosity. She understood the technical aspects of long-range shooting better than most people realized. "I'll have everything ready." Morrison nodded and turned to leave, then stopped. "Rodriguez, you ever done any shooting yourself?" The question caught her off guard. "Sir, recreational shooting, hunting, anything like that?" Maria hesitated. The truth was, she had been visiting the base's shooting range regularly, practicing with various weapons during her off-duty hours. She had discovered a natural talent for marksmanship that surprised everyone, including herself. But she wasn't sure how to explain that without sounding like she was trying to insert herself into situations where she didn't belong. Sir. I like to stay current with weapons proficiency. Morrison studied her for a moment, those gray eyes seeming to see right through her. How's your grouping with a precision rifle? Now she was really confused, but she answered honestly. Last time I shot the M24, I was putting rounds into a 2-inch group at 300 yards. Something flickered across Morrison's face, surprise maybe or calculation. 2 inches? Yes, sir. He was quiet for a long moment, and Maria could almost see the wheels turning in his head. Finally, he nodded. Get that ammunition ready. And Rodriguez? Sir? Pack your gear too. You're coming with us.
Maria felt her stomach drop. Sir, I'm not trained for...
You're trained for ammunition support, which is what we need. Collins is a good shooter, but he doesn't know our resupply procedures. If we get into a sustained firefight, I need someone who can keep the long gun fed properly. Morrison's voice was matter-of-fact, but there was something else in his tone. Something that suggested this wasn't entirely about ammunition. You'll stay back with the support element. Nothing fancy. St. Paul's Morian stood at the depot. Maria stood among the rows of ammunition boxes, her mind racing. She had been preparing for this moment without realizing it. All those hours at the range. All that studying about ballistics and wind drift and trajectory calculations. But now that it was actually happening, she felt unprepared in ways that had nothing to do with technical knowledge. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity. Maria assembled the ammunition loads with careful precision, double-checking every count, every type of round. For the sniper's support, she selected match-grade ammunition that she knew would perform consistently at long range. She packed everything in organized loads, each one labeled and ready to grab quickly in the field. As she worked, she thought about her father, who had served 2 tours in Vietnam and never talked much about what he had experienced there. He had taught her to shoot when she was 12, taking her to a range outside Los Angeles, where she learned to respect firearms and understand their capabilities. But he had also taught her that the ability to take a life was a responsibility that shouldn't be taken lightly. Mija, he had said to her once, after she had shot a particularly good group at the range, being able to shoot is just a skill. Knowing when to shoot, that's wisdom, and knowing when not to shoot, that's even more important. She wondered what he would think of her now, preparing to go into harm's way with some of the military's elite fighters. Would he be proud? Worried? Both? By the time she finished preparing the ammunition, the sun was climbing higher in the sky and the temperature was already approaching 90 degrees. It was going to be a hot day, which meant a long, uncomfortable mission for everyone involved. Maria changed into her combat gear, checking and rechecking every piece of equipment. Body armor, helmet, basic load of ammunition for her personal weapon, water, medical supplies.
She felt like she was putting on someone else's clothes, stepping into a role she had never expected to fill. The team gathered at the vehicle staging area, 12 men who looked like they had stepped out of a recruiting poster.
They moved with the easy confidence of people who had done this many times before, checking weapons, adjusting gear, talking quietly among themselves. Maria felt conspicuously out of place, the only woman among a group of warriors who seemed to belong in this environment in a way she never would. Petty Officer Collins was there, a lean man in his late 20s with the kind of weathered face that spoke of multiple deployments in harsh environments. He nodded to Maria as she approached with the ammunition loads. "You must be Rodriguez," he said, extending a hand.
"Heard you put together some good loads for me?"
Yes, Petty Officer. Match-grade ammunition, consistent lot numbers.
"Should perform well out to 1,800 meters, assuming conditions are favorable." Collins raised an eyebrow. "You know about external ballistics?" "Some. I've been studying."
Studying. He smiled, but it wasn't condescending.
That's more than most ammo specialists do.
Most of them just hand you bullets and hope for the best. Morrison appeared beside them, wearing full combat gear and carrying a rifle that looked like it had been through several wars. "Everyone ready?" The team confirmed their readiness, and Maria found herself climbing into the back of a mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicle, surrounded by men who seemed completely at ease with the idea of driving into potential combat. She tried to project the same calm confidence, but inside, her heart was beating fast enough that she worried the others might hear it. As the convoy of vehicles rolled out of the base gates, Maria watched the familiar landscape of the base disappear behind them. They were entering what the military called Indian country, the areas outside the wire, where every turn in the road might hide an improvised explosive device, Every building might contain enemy fighters. Every mission carried the possibility of not coming home. The vehicles moved in a tactical formation, maintaining proper spacing and constantly varying their speed to make it harder for potential attackers to predict their movements. Maria had ridden in convoys before, but always on routine supply runs to other bases. This felt different. There was a tension in the air, an electricity that came from knowing they were actively seeking contact with the enemy. About an hour into the drive, Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. All stations, this is Alpha 6. We're approaching the dismount point. Prepare for ground movement in 5 mics. Maria checked her equipment one more time, making sure everything was secure and easily accessible. Around her, the other soldiers were doing the same, each man going through his own pre-combat ritual. She noticed that several of them touched small personal items, photos, religious symbols, lucky coins, before adjusting their gear and checking their weapons. The vehicles came to a stop in a valley between 2 ridgelines, hidden from direct observation but still vulnerable to attack from the high ground on either side. Maria could see why this location had been chosen. It provided concealment for the dismount, but it also felt like a trap waiting to be sprung. As the team prepared to move out on foot, Morrison approached Maria one more time. Rodriguez, you're going to stay with Collins and provide security for his position. Keep his ammunition organized and ready. If things go badly, you might need to help spot targets or adjust his equipment. Can you handle that?
Yes, sir. Maria tried to sound more confident than she felt.
Good. Morrison studied her face for a moment.
And Rodriguez, if something happens to Collins, if he gets hit or can't continue the mission, you take over his rifle.
No hesitation, no doubt. Lives might depend on it.
The words hit her like a physical blow. Take over the rifle? She was just supposed to carry ammunition, stay in the background, support the real shooters. But looking into Morrison's eyes, she realized he was completely serious. Somehow, without her noticing, she had become more than just an ammunition specialist. She had become a potential shooter. As the team moved out across the rocky terrain, heading toward their target, Maria felt the weight of more than just the ammunition she was carrying. She was carrying the trust of her fellow soldiers, the responsibility of a mission that could save American lives, and the possibility that before the day was over, she might have to become someone she had never expected to be. The terrain of Afghanistan seemed designed to test human endurance. Rocky slopes that shifted underfoot, hidden gullies that could twist an ankle or conceal an enemy fighter, and a sun that beat down mercilessly from a cloudless sky. Maria had been walking for 2 hours, her body armor soaked with sweat, her pack feeling heavier with each step. Around her, the team moved like ghosts across the landscape, their movements coordinated and silent. Collins moved beside her, his sniper rifle slung across his back, his eyes constantly scanning the ridgelines above them for potential threats or shooting positions. Maria found herself learning from watching him, noting how he evaluated terrain, how he identified cover and concealment, how he seemed to catalog every rock and bush as either an asset or a liability. See that outcropping about 400 meters up the slope? Collins said quietly, pointing to a formation of rocks that jutted out from the mountainside. That's where I'd put a shooter if I wanted to control this valley. Good fields of fire, multiple escape routes, natural protection from return fire. Maria studied the rocks, trying to see what Collins saw. It's pretty exposed, though. No way to get up there without being seen. That's the beauty of it. Most people would think the same thing you just did. They'd assume no one would be crazy enough to climb up there in broad daylight. But if you moved at night, took your time, you could own this entire valley from that position. The lesson was interrupted by Morrison's voice over the radio, barely above a whisper. All stations, Alpha 6. Target compound is 1 click ahead. Moving to overwatch positions now. The team began to spread out, each element moving toward predetermined positions that would give them overlapping fields of fire on the target area. Collins led Maria up a steep slope toward a cluster of boulders that would provide both concealment and a clear view of the compound below. As they climbed, Maria's legs burned from the effort, but she forced herself to keep pace with Collins. She could see the compound now, a collection of mud brick buildings surrounded by a low wall, sitting in a depression between 2 hills like it was hiding from the world. Smoke rose from one of the buildings, suggesting people were inside, going about their daily routine, unaware that 12 heavily armed Americans were positioning themselves around their home. Collins found a position among the boulders that gave him a clear view of the compound while keeping him hidden from observation. He unslung his rifle and began setting up his shooting position with the methodical precision of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. Maria positioned herself slightly behind and to his right, organizing the ammunition and preparing to assist however he needed. "Range to the compound?" Collins asked, his eye already pressed to his scope. Maria pulled out a laser rangefinder and took a measurement. 640 meters to the main building.
Wind is light, maybe 3 to 5 miles per hour from the west.
Good.
That's well within the effective range of this system.
Collins made some adjustments to his scope, then settled into his firing position. Now we wait. The waiting was the hardest part. Maria had expected combat to be constant action, adrenaline-fueled chaos from beginning to end. But the reality was long periods of tense silence broken by brief moments of violence that changed everything in seconds.
She found herself focusing on small details, the way sweat ran down Collins's face, the sound of her own breathing inside her helmet, the weight of her rifle in her hands. 20 minutes passed before Morrison's voice crackled over the radio again.
We have positive identification of the target. Adult male, gray beard, distinctive white head wrap. He's in the main building with at least 4 other military-age males. Weapons visible include AK-47s and what appears to be a PKM machine gun. Collins adjusted his position slightly, tracking his rifle toward the main building. I can see them through the windows, he whispered to Maria.
Target is moving around inside. This might take a while.
But it didn't take a while. 30 seconds later, the world exploded. The first indication something was wrong was the sharp crack of a rifle shot from somewhere up the ridge behind them. Maria heard the bullet impact rock near Collins' position, sending fragments of stone flying through the air.
Then Morrison's voice on the radio, no longer a whisper but an urgent shout. Contact left! Contact left!
We're taking fire from the high ground. Collins immediately shifted his rifle toward the direction of the incoming fire, but Maria could see the problem. They were caught in the middle, with the target compound below them and enemy fighters above them on the ridge. The mission had turned into a trap and they were the ones caught in it. I can see muzzle flashes from at least 3 positions, Collins said, his voice steady despite the bullets that were starting to impact closer to their position. Range is about 300 meters upslope from us. More shots cracked overhead, and Maria could hear other members of the team returning fire from their positions around the compound. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Instead of a planned assault on a single target, they were now engaged in a firefight with an unknown number of enemy fighters who had the advantage of high ground and prepared positions. Collins fired his first shot of the engagement, a carefully aimed round toward one of the muzzle flashes on the ridge. Maria watched through her binoculars as dust kicked up near one of the enemy positions, but the return fire continued unabated. Miss, Collins muttered, working the bolt of his rifle to chamber another round. Wind must be stronger up there than I calculated. He fired again, and this time Maria saw one of the muzzle flashes stop. But there were still at least 2 other positions sending accurate fire their way, and the situation was getting worse by the minute. That's when Maria heard Morrison on the radio, his voice tight with pain. This is Alpha 6.
I'm hit. Taking command is Alpha 2.
Her stomach dropped. Morrison was wounded, possibly badly.
The team leader who had brought her on this mission, who had trusted her with more responsibility than she had ever asked for, was down. Collins fired a 3rd shot, then a 4th, but the enemy fire was intensifying.
Maria could see why more fighters were moving into positions on the ridge, turning what had been a 3-on-1 advantage for the enemy into something much worse. They were being overwhelmed.
Rodriguez, Collins said, his voice strained. I need you to spot for me.
Use your binoculars and call out targets. I can't track all of them and maintain accurate fire. Maria pressed the binoculars to her eyes, scanning the ridgeline for muzzle flashes and movement.
I see a shooter behind that large boulder, about 2 o'clock from your current aim point. Range looks like 260 meters. Collins adjusted his aim and fired.
This time, Maria saw the impact clearly, a good hit that silenced another enemy position. But even as they were finding success, Maria could see the bigger picture was getting worse. Radio chatter indicated that at least 3 members of the team were wounded, ammunition was running low, and the enemy had reinforcements moving in from multiple directions. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time.
That's when it happened. Collins was lining up another shot when Maria saw the glint of sunlight off metal from a position they hadn't identified before, much closer than the others, maybe only 150 meters away.
Shooter. Close left, she shouted, but it was too late. The bullet hit Collins in the chest, spinning him away from his rifle and sending him crashing back against the rocks behind their position. Maria could see immediately that the wound was serious. Blood was spreading rapidly across his body armor, and his breathing was labored and shallow.
She dropped her binoculars and crawled over to him, pressing her hands against the wound to try to control the bleeding.
seconds. Stay with me.
His eyes found hers, and she could see the awareness there, the understanding of what had just happened.
Rodriguez, he said, his voice barely above a whisper.
Take the rifle. What? No, I'm just supposed to... Take the rifle. This time his voice was stronger. Urgent.
You're the only one here who can make those shots. The team needs covering fire, or we're all going to die. Maria looked from Collins to the sniper rifle lying abandoned beside them, then back to Collins.
The mathematics of the situation were simple and terrible. Collins was wounded badly enough that he couldn't continue shooting.
She was the only person in their position who had any chance of providing the long-range precision fire the team desperately needed. But she was also just an ammunition specialist who had been practicing marksmanship as a hobby.
I don't know if I can. You can. Collins grabbed her arm with surprising strength. I've been watching you. The way you read wind, the way you understand ballistics. You know more about this than most designated marksmen I've worked with. And right now, you're all we've got.
Another burst of enemy fire impacted near their position, close enough to shower them with rock chips. Maria could hear more radio chatter, more reports of wounded team members, more requests for supporting fire that weren't being answered because the person who was supposed to provide it was bleeding out in front of her.
She looked at the rifle, a precision instrument that she had studied but never fired in combat. Then she looked at Collins, whose life was slowly ebbing away despite her efforts to stop the bleeding.
Finally, she looked down the slope toward where she knew the other members of the team were fighting for their lives, waiting for someone to provide the covering fire they needed to survive. Maria Rodriguez, ammunition specialist, stepped away from Collins and picked up the sniper rifle. The weapon felt different in her hands than it had during training, heavier, more significant, loaded with possibility and responsibility in equal measure. She settled into the shooting position Collins had established, pressing her eye to the scope and searching for targets. Through the magnified optics, the enemy positions on the ridge seemed much closer. She could see individual fighters, could make out details of their weapons and equipment. These weren't faceless enemies anymore, they were specific human beings with specific capabilities and specific intentions to kill her and everyone she had come to fight alongside. Maria found the shooter who had wounded Collins, still in the same position, apparently confident that he had eliminated the threat from the American sniper. She could see him clearly through the scope. A bearded man in traditional Afghan clothing, working the bolt of what looked like an old Soviet-era rifle. She settled the crosshairs on his center mass, took a breath, let half of it out, and held. Her finger found the trigger, and she began to apply pressure slowly and steadily, just like her father had taught her all those years ago at that range in Los Angeles. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that seemed to echo off the surrounding mountains. Through the scope, Maria saw the man on the ridge jerk backward and disappear behind cover. She had made her first combat shot.
But there was no time to think about what she had just done. Collins was right. The team needed covering fire, and she was the only one who could provide it.
Maria worked the bolt of the rifle, chambering another round, and began searching for her next target. The battle for survival was just beginning, and Maria Rodriguez, who had only been supposed to carry ammunition, had become the shooter her team desperately needed. Time moved differently in combat. Maria discovered this as she settled behind the sniper rifle, her world suddenly compressed to the circle of magnified reality visible through the scope. Seconds stretched like hours when she was lining up a shot, but entire minutes could disappear in what felt like heartbeats as she moved from target to target. Collins was still conscious behind her, though his breathing was getting shallower. He had managed to apply pressure to his wound and was using his radio to coordinate with the rest of the team. But Maria could hear the effort it took him to speak.
Every word was precious, and he was using them to help her become the sniper the team needed.
Rodriguez, he said, his voice tight with pain. Enemy fighter 11 o'clock, approximately 200 meters. He's got a clear shot at Alpha 2's position. Maria swung the rifle left, searching through the scope until she found the target. A man in a gray shirt crouched behind a cluster of rocks, his rifle trained down the slope toward where she knew other team members were taking cover.
She could see the concentration on his face, the way he was timing his breathing to make an accurate shot. The mathematics of precision shooting that she had studied in her spare time suddenly became life and death calculations.
Wind speed, distance, target movement, bullet drop, the angle of the slope, all factors that could mean the difference between protecting her teammates and watching them die. Maria made the calculations instinctively now, adjustments that had become muscle memory through countless hours of practice. She placed the crosshair slightly high and to the left to compensate for the distance in the light crosswind. then controlled her breathing and squeezed the trigger with steady pressure. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder, and through the scope she watched the enemy fighter slump forward.
You wouldn't be shooting at anyone else. Good shot, Collins whispered. Now move to your right. There's another one trying to flank us from that direction. Maria worked the bolt, chambering a fresh round, and swung the rifle right. This was becoming a deadly rhythm spot. Calculate, shoot, repeat. But each shot was taking a toll, not just on the enemy, but on her.
She could feel the weight of each decision, the knowledge that she was ending human lives with precise, calculated violence. The radio crackled with updates from around the battlefield.
Morrison was still alive but badly wounded, unable to move. 2 other team members had taken wounds, though they were still fighting. The original target, the Taliban commander they had come to capture, had fled the compound when the fighting started, disappearing into the maze of mountains with his security detail. But the mission had changed.
This wasn't about capturing a high-value target anymore. This was about survival, about keeping 12 Americans alive long enough to get back to base. And increasingly, that survival depended on Maria's ability to keep enemy fighters from overrunning their positions. She found her next target, a man with a machine gun who was setting up to rake the entire American position with automatic fire.
The range was longer this time, nearly 400 meters, and the target was partially concealed behind a low stone wall. It would be a difficult shot under any circumstances, nearly impossible given the pressure of combat conditions. Maria took her time, more time than she probably should have, but she knew this shot had to count. If the machine gunner got his weapon into action, he could suppress the entire American force, making it impossible for them to return fire or move to better positions. The success of this single shot could determine whether everyone made it home. She steadied her breathing, feeling her heartbeat slow as she entered the zone of perfect concentration her father had taught her to find. The crosshairs settled on the small portion of the target visible above the stone wall. Wind, distance, angle, all factored into her aim point. She began to squeeze the trigger with the same slow, steady pressure that had worked on every shot before. The rifle fired, and Maria watched the machine gunner collapse behind his weapon. The threat was eliminated, but she knew there would be others.
"Outstanding shooting," Collins said, and Maria could hear both admiration and relief in his voice. "You've probably just saved half the team." But even as she was finding success with the rifle, Maria could see that the tactical situation was still deteriorating. More enemy fighters were arriving, moving into positions that the Americans hadn't identified before the engagement began. They were facing a larger force than intelligence had suggested, and they were running low on ammunition.
That's when she heard Morrison on the radio again, his voice weak but determined. "All stations, Alpha 6. We need to start moving toward the extraction point. We can't stay in these positions much longer." The extraction point was a landing zone about 2 kilometers away where helicopters could pick them up, assuming they could fight their way there. But moving across open ground while under fire was one of the most dangerous maneuvers in infantry combat, especially when some team members were wounded and couldn't move quickly. Maria realized that her role was about to change again. She wouldn't just be providing covering fire from a fixed position. She would need to move with the team, providing precision shooting support while they displaced across hostile terrain. It was a job that required not just marksmanship skills, but tactical awareness and the ability to make life or death decisions under extreme pressure. Collins seemed to read her thoughts. "Rodriguez, when the team starts to move, you're going to need to provide overwatch. Find positions where you can cover their movement, then displace to the next position. Keep the enemy heads down while the team moves." "What about you?" Maria asked, looking at Collins's pale face and the blood that continued to seep through his gear despite the pressure bandage. "I'll move when I can. Right now, I'll coordinate on the radio and spot targets for you. We're a team, Rodriguez. You shoot, I'll guide." The movement began 5 minutes later. Maria watched through her scope as team members began bounding from position to position, using cover and concealment to mask their movement toward the extraction point. Her job was to identify threats and eliminate them before they could engage the moving Americans. She found a fighter who was tracking one of the team members with his rifle, clearly preparing to shoot. The range was close, maybe 150 meters, but the target was moving, trying to get a better angle on his intended victim. Maria led the target slightly, anticipating his movement, and fired. The fighter dropped, his rifle clattering down the rocky slope. Another target farther away was calling out positions to other fighters, apparently acting as a spotter for coordinated fire. Maria put a bullet through his center mass before he could complete his next transmission. The deadly dance continued as the team moved in bounds toward the extraction point.
Maria would identify threats, eliminate them, then move to a new position to cover the next phase of movement. Collins moved with her when he could, crawling from cover to cover, continuing to spot targets and coordinate on the radio despite his wounds. The enemy was adapting too. They were learning to avoid exposing themselves to long-range fire, using covered approaches and dead ground to get closer to the American positions. The engagement was turning into a running gun battle across increasingly difficult terrain. That's when Maria saw the greatest threat yet. A group of at least 6 fighters had worked their way around to a flanking position, where they would be able to attack the team from the side as they moved toward the landing zone. If those fighters got into position, they could devastate the Americans with crossfire that would be impossible to escape. The range was long, over 500 meters, and the targets were moving quickly across broken ground. It would require multiple precise shots in rapid succession, something that pushed the limits of both the rifle system and Maria's abilities. But if she didn't stop them, people were going to die. Maria found a stable shooting position among a cluster of boulders and began engaging the flanking force. Her first shot dropped the lead fighter, causing the others to dive for cover. But they continued moving, using bounds and rushes to get closer to the American positions. She worked the rifle bolt and fired again, then again, each shot carefully placed to maximize the chance of a hit while minimizing the time between shots. The enemy fighters were good, using proper tactical movement and covering each other's advances. But Maria was better. By the time she had fired her 6th shot, 4 of the 6 flanking fighters were down, and the remaining 2 had broken contact and were retreating back up the ridge. The threat was eliminated, but Maria realized she had used most of her remaining ammunition in the process. Collins had been watching through binoculars, calling out corrections and keeping track of the tactical situation.
"Rodriguez," he said, "that was some of the finest shooting I've ever seen under combat conditions. You just saved the entire team." But there was no time to appreciate the compliment.
The radio crackled with an update from the team leader who had taken over from Morrison. "All stations Alpha 2. Birds inbound, ETA 5 mics. We need to secure the landing zone." The final push to the extraction point was the most dangerous part of the movement. They would be crossing open ground with minimal cover, exposed to fire from multiple directions.
Maria positioned herself on high ground where she could overwatch the entire route, scanning for threats through her rifle scope. She saw them coming before anyone else did. A large force of enemy fighters, maybe 15 or 20 men, moving to intercept the American team before they could reach the landing zone. They were using a gully for concealment, but Maria could see them through her scope, moving in tactical formation toward a position where they could ambush the retreating Americans.
With only a few rounds left, Maria had to make every shot count. She began engaging the enemy force at maximum range, putting carefully aimed shots into the lead elements to disrupt their attack.
Each shot had to be perfect. There was no ammunition to waste on suppressive fire or ranging shots. Her first round took down what appeared to be the enemy leader, a man with binoculars, who was directing the movement of the others. Her second shot eliminated a fighter carrying what looked like a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, a weapon that could have been devastating against the incoming helicopters. She continued firing, each shot precisely placed, each one eliminating a specific threat. The enemy force began to falter, their coordinated attack dissolving into confusion as their leaders fell to accurate sniper fire from a position they couldn't identify. By the time Maria fired her last round, the enemy attack had been broken. The surviving fighters were retreating, unable to maintain their assault in the face of precision fire that seemed to anticipate their every move. Behind her, Maria could hear the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching the landing zone. The team had made it to the extraction point, wounded but alive. Collins was being helped to his feet by 2 other team members, his wounds serious but not life-threatening thanks to quick medical attention and his own toughness. Morrison was loaded onto the helicopter first, his wounds requiring immediate medical attention. But he was conscious, and as the stretcher passed Maria's position, he reached out and grabbed her arm. "Rodriguez," he said, his voice weak but clear. "Outstanding work. You saved us all today." As the helicopters lifted off from the landing zone, carrying the team back to safety, Maria sat among the rocks where she had made her stand, the empty sniper rifle across her knees. She thought about the morning, when she had been just an ammunition specialist preparing loads for a routine mission. Now she was returning as something else entirely, a combat veteran, a sniper, a shooter who had proven herself under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The transformation hadn't been planned. It hadn't been anticipated in any training manual or tactical doctrine. It had been born of necessity, shaped by courage and proven through precise, deadly action, when the lives of her teammates hung in the balance. Collins, wounded but insistent on walking to the helicopter under his own power, stopped beside her position. "Rodriguez," he said, "you're not just an ammunition specialist anymore.
You're a sniper now. One of the best I've ever seen. That's not going to be easy to live with. But it's who you are now."
Maria looked at the rifle in her hands, still warm from firing, then at the mountains where the battle had been fought. She thought about the men she had killed today, the decisions she had made, the lives she had saved by taking others.
Collins was right. She would never be just an ammunition specialist again.
As the helicopter climbed away from the battlefield, Maria Rodriguez looked out at the Afghan landscape below and began to understand the weight of what she had become. She had been only supposed to carry ammunition, to support from the shadows, to let others do the fighting. But when it mattered most, when lives hung in the balance and there was no one else to take the shot, she had become the shooter her team needed. The woman who returned to base that day was fundamentally different from the one who had left that morning. She carried with her the knowledge of what she was capable of, the burden of decisions made under fire, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that when her teammates needed her most, she had not failed them. In the weeks that followed, Maria's actions that day would become legend within the special operations community. The ammunition specialist who became a sniper when our team needed it most. The support soldier who stepped into a role she had never trained for and performed with precision that saved lives. But for Maria, sitting in that helicopter flying back to base, the most important thing was simpler. Her teammates were alive, going home to their families. Because when it mattered most, she had been able to make the shots that counted.